Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Industry Roundtable Series, Visioning the Future of AgriTech, brought to you by NUS Enterprise. My name is Chae, your host for today. NUS Enterprise is the entrepreneur arm of the National University of Singapore, where we play a pivotal role in advancing innovation and supporting entrepreneurial journeys. The Industry Roundtable Series is a platform for in-depth discussion and exchange of knowledge among startups, researchers, and industry experts. Centered on a series of topics, the Industry Roundtable harnesses the university's innovation resources to uncover the next trend. Without much further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for today, David Sher. David has a wide-ranging experiences in the field of life sciences from pharmaceuticals, biotech, nanotech, healthcare, and agri-tech. He was previously the managing director of several companies and is currently the venture manager for food tech and agri-tech startups under the NUS Group program. David holds a Master's of Business Administration and Management of Technology from the University of Lancaster and a bachelor degree in chemistry from NUS. On the panel with us today, we have with us Timothy Chua, Business Development Director of Singrow, Eunyoung Chae, Professor at the NUS Department of Biological Sciences, and Andrew Powell, Chief Executive Officer of Asia BioBusiness. The stage is yours, David. Over to you. Sorry, I think, David, you are muted.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Chae, for having me here today. So, hello, everyone. My name is David Sher, and I would like to welcome you guys again to this Industry Roundtable series. And today we are going to focus on agri-tech industry. All right, as you know that agriculture industry has been always viewed as very traditional, low-tech, mass volume industry for a very, very long time. However, past decades, there has been a leap advancement to the technologies in agriculture. So at the same time, over the years, the awareness of food security has been also increasing, and some countries like Singapore, who rely on importing food and raw food ingredients to meet their nation's needs, has established national initiative to promote high efficient farming. Singapore's 30 by 30 food security goals is one of the example for such an initiative. So in order to achieve this objective, high agricultural technology can be introduced to the farms to grow the crops better, faster, more economical, better yield, and more nutritious. So therefore, today we would like to discuss on our vision for the future of agri-tech. And we are so glad that today we have three guest speakers to join in this roundtable discussion. First, we would like to welcome Mr. Timothy Chua. Tim is actually the Business Development Director of Singrow Private Limited. Tim is a member of Singrow's Pioneer Team. And Singrow is actually a NUS spin-off company via its entrepreneurship program known as GRAPE. The company has an indoor strawberry farm at Henderson, Singapore. Tim was the regional director from Enterprise Singapore in Sydney previously. So Tim will be addressing on the current and future trend in the agriculture industry. Next, we have Prof. Chae Eunyoung. Chair is actually the assistant professor in Department of Biological Science and US. Prof. Chae is a very outstanding plant biologist and specializing in plant immunity. And she is very well versed in various new technologies in addressing the gaps in the agriculture from the plant physiology approach rather than the conventional engineering approach. And not forgetting our third speaker, Dr. Andrew Powell. He is actually the CEO of Asia BioBusiness Private Limited, which he has co-founded in year 2005 in Singapore. He has been providing consultancy service globally to private and public institutions and companies in the field of agriculture. His recent projects are smallholders farming, transformation management, as well as social licensing. So he is actually the man that is very near to the market and then who can share with us what's going on in the market as well as what's the market's needs. So without delay, I shall let our guest speaker to self-introduce themselves in more great details and share with you their views for the future of AgriTech. Hand over to you, Tim.
All right, thanks, David. So let me just jump right in. All right, so thanks again, David, and afternoon, everyone, for joining us here in this seminar. Thanks to NUS too, and everyone else involved for organizing today's event. It's really interesting the times that we are living in right now. Who knew that we could be on the cusp of an era eating insects and plant-based meats? Nothing against them, but I never imagined our vegetarian hawkers to be at the forefront of the AgriTech revolution with their plant-based char sius. I'm certainly looking forward to being a part of this change. So let's dive right in. For a start, let's have a look at these photos and see if anything strikes you. To be fair, I did cheat a little and converted that photo that you see on the right into black and white. But that aside, they are both photos of agricultural operations. The point here is that both photos were taken about 80 years apart, and it appears that nothing much has changed in this time. Seems like a long time, 80 years, but in that time, we had gone from horse-drawn carriages to cars like this. And for those of us who can't afford a car like that, feel free to be consoled, like me, by the fact that when it rains, the driver will certainly feel like it's 1930s. So what happened to the agricultural sector? Why were we slower to innovate? Economic conditions, cost of technology, adoption, market needs, all this could be possible reasons. But I suspect that the answers are a lot more convoluted than we would like it to be. And in Singapore's case, we did bite the bullet when we did and traded agricultural sufficiency for economic progress. It might surprise some of you then that in the past we had 20 chickens for every person. And when Singapore became independent in 1965, we had around 20,000 vegetable farms producing 60% of the vegetables that we consumed. But now we import more than 90%. But here's the thing. While Singapore was busy evolving itself and forging ahead in its economy, so was everyone. And now, over 60 years later, we are faced with a new reality. All things being equal, climate change will continue to limit our ability to produce crops with the same quality, using similar farming methods and at similar volumes of production compared to earlier harvests. Who remembers the fires in Australia late last year that threatened the entire eastern seaboard from Queensland all the way down to Victoria? Those fires occurred during the prime harvest season for citrus, by the way. And now we are seeing a similar scenario play itself out in Colorado. As the world continues to evolve, we place even greater demand on our farmland, and in turn, they are becoming less and less suitable for production. According to an Oliver Wyman report on Agriculture 4.0, 25% of all farmland is now deemed to be highly degraded. while a further 44% is considered slightly to moderately degraded. The specter of climate change and environmental impact further underscores this issue. Population growth and urbanization will also continue to shape the sector, while the world's population is expected to continue growing by 33% to around 10 billion by 2050. This will be exacerbated by continued strong growth in the population of middle-income earners globally, which currently accounts for over 50% of the world's population, or just under 4 billion people as of 2018. And as you are well aware, as population demographics shift, so do their dietary requirements, with demand for meat and dairy products expected to soar. And as populations evolve, they will likely strain the agricultural sector even further, with food waste becoming increasingly problematic. It may surprise you then that approximately 33 to 50% of about $1 trillion worth of food produced is wasted. My friends, the world is increasingly fragile, and these factors that I've mentioned will influence, if not dictate, the trends going forward. Even for us here at Singrow, the COVID-19 situation tripped us coming out of the gates, delaying our launch date. No one is spared, but everyone can be prepared. So what lies ahead? There's literally so much innovation and research being done nowadays, and so much more that could be done. That is truly an amazing time to be in. The FAO has also called out the need for increased innovation in the food and agricultural sector in its 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development report. The growing convergence of agriculture with other sectors such as automation, mechanization, data analytics, and logistics can only provide a fertile foundation to build off of. On the other hand, catastrophic triggers, both natural and man-made, population growth and food waste will likely continue to influence the AgriTech sector going forward. For today, I'll just touch on a few key trends. Enabled by modern telecommunication networks and access to big data and data analytics, today's farming sector has never been more sophisticated or had a more solid foundation for doing what they can do better. And many of the tools are already available, such as maps, satellite imagery, and meteorological data. In fact, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis used an app called GeoWiki to crowdsource data for a 2018 study to estimate the amount of smallholder farms around the world. However, there just doesn't seem to be much activity thus far in the way of standardization and democratization of data to collect, manage, and use agricultural data insofar as to produce quality insights for decision-making beyond the stakeholder level or across the value chain. In fact, there isn't even the means to define the severity of land degradation that I mentioned earlier. But imagine, if you will, being able to provide hyper-localized, data-driven insights to fine-tune long-held farming practices for more efficient growing. Or imagine watching a TikTok cooking video and then being offered to purchase the ingredients fresh after the video. Nothing new, you say? Perhaps. But what if you were the farmer and you could better use this insight to grow just enough of the produce? This translates to less wastage, better use of raw materials, better logistics, and so on. In Singrow, we focus on pragmatic innovation. Innovation, especially those requiring significant research, are usually costly. And if you're an agri-tech startup like us, you need to make well sure that you're spending wisely to minimize your burn rate. So a typical decision-making process for us will start with recognizing a potential challenge and then estimating a ballpark figure to address the problem using human capital. Being a team of scientists and engineers, we would then look at how technology could then be used to solve the challenge, fire up Excel to calculate the cost of such a solution, and estimate the cost. 300K, $500,000, $1 million. If it's going to cost us $1 million, or say even 500K to solve the problem of pollinating flowers indoors, I think we will need to be sure that the expense is justified. However, Done right, automation can solve many problems faced by the agricultural sector, especially since it offers the benefit of repeatability and control. With automation, you get to minimize, if not eliminate, product loss due to human error or even vengeful employees. Who of us here remembers the time when people were finding needles in their strawberries? One more thing, with the ubiquity of IoT devices and similar technologies, the commoditization is well underway, improving access to technology. From CO2 and O2 sensors to water and light quality meters, all of these devices and the software to run them are easily available to help farmer operators automate an indoor farm. In fact, judging by the amount of investments and activity going into the space, there will be no longer any shortage of solutions to choose from, further increasing access from an economic perspective. As agricultural land continues to degrade and climate change continues to impose more and more challenges on the agricultural sector, the trend towards moving this sector indoors, either into greenhouses or indoor farms, will prevail, where it's more conducive to produce fruits and vegetables for the population. In a controlled environment, farm operators can better monitor and control most, if not all, of the variables that ultimately dictate the quality of the produce. Of course, CEA isn't a panacea for the sector's challenges, and key barriers for operators include increased utility costs, cost of real estate, and high capex for equipment. It's certainly not for everybody, but if you're not growing canola, it's certainly not for everybody. You're not going to grow canola or barley in an indoor farm. For everyone else, CEA offers the means to grow high quality produce in otherwise challenging locations, like the Middle East, where electricity costs are less than 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So imagine the difference that CEA would make to a region that imported well over 16,000 tons of fruit and vegetables per day in 2015. And who's to say that with more widespread proliferation of IoT devices, automation, and mechanization, that the indoor farm won't be increasingly automated, especially for smallholder farms. So where we stand currently, a robust supply chain remains a cornerstone of the sector, enabling goods from one country or location to be transported to another efficiently. In no other country is this more evident than in Singapore, where we import around 90% of all the food that we consume. So arguably, someone like IKEA operates in a wholly different segment from agriculture. But I assure you that I have friends that would argue that the shelf life of IKEA products sometimes mirror that of fresh produce. I'm exaggerating, of course, but IKEA's focus on cost per touch is highly relatable to us. This metric essentially aims to minimize the amount of contact or layers that separate, in our case, the farm from the fork. The more layers, the more expensive the produce becomes. But more importantly, the greater the likelihood of losing the produce due to poor handling, product loss, damage, and so on, adding unnecessary costs to the consumer and or the farmer. And according to a report from 2017, this loss was equal to about 1.3 billion tons of food. A well-planned and well-executed supply chain also enables the produce to be distributed efficiently with reduced wastage while in transit. Already, companies have been dabbling with the concept of hyper-localizing production beyond large-scale greenhouses and indoor farms. Aero Farms is a great example, as is Aero Oasis, a startup which estimates that it can produce up to 26 harvests a year of leafy greens through its Oasis mini system. Localized production at the regional and district levels enables more targeted production, a lower carbon footprint, less food waste, more effective use of free space, and so on. So I've spoken at length about what the upcoming trends would be in the space of AgriTech. It's by no means exhaustive, and I could go on covering other sectors such as pastoral agriculture, aquaculture, and so on. But to wrap up my presentation, I wanted to touch briefly on the role of governments as agents of change. In the agri-tech industry, the role of governments is less so of a driver than that of an enabler, a facilitator. It's within the government's DNA then to maintain a long-term bird's eye view while driving the industry's growth and evolution. As such, they have the motivation and often the means to encourage that growth by supporting innovation and investment into the sector so as to achieve specific goals such as food security, resilience, and technological leadership. So with the right foundation and balance in place, governments can facilitate public-private partnerships and incentivize cross-industry collaboration to achieve the above-mentioned goals. In Singapore's case, focusing on the development of smart farming and precision agri-tech sector allows the industry as a whole to remain somewhat asset-light while leapfrogging more established markets that have a more mature agricultural sector. And as nations around the world continue to urbanize, Singapore's city-state framework can be used as a testbed for new emerging technologies that could then be proliferated overseas subsequently. And finally, something that continues to be on my mind is the fact that Singapore no longer seems to be referred to as the Garden City, or even a city in a garden. But a recent Straits Times article quoted Minister Desmond Lee about the greening of Singapore's industrial estates. And I do ask myself whether this includes agri-tech solutions as well. And if so, I believe we are on a great path towards building sustainability and security for the country. And with that, I thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for sharing with us the trends, current trends in the agri-tech industry. So I get to know that Singrow actually has achieved they actually have came out with a new plant variety of the strawberries that is very suitable for the local climates. And then they actually achieved that via understanding the flowering patterns of the strawberry as well as a few generation of crossbreeding on their strawberries. So they actually has improved the efficiency of the yield as well as shortened the cycle, the fruiting cycle by understanding the physiology of the strawberry plant. So it's a very, very powerful tool that one can actually apply in how to improve the crops yield of in the agriculture industry. And then we wanted to probably invite Eunyoung, who actually is a plant biologist, and then share with us your opinions in terms of that. Eunyoung?
Okay, may I start my presentation then?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. Are you seeing my full screen now?
Yes, Eunyoung, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to virtually meet all of you. I see the number of attendance is over 100, probably largest crowd that I've ever spoke on my monitor on Zoom, except my big class. So I'm pretty honored to meet all of you guys. Today I'm gonna talk about, as a plant biologist, about plant breeding in general. And my title, the talk of my talk title is Fast for Plant Breeding. Here I show several plants which will be named throughout my talk. All right. Before I start, I want to introduce a model. We work on model plant called Arabidopsis thaliana. It's a wild species. It's actually covering most of the geographic locations. Except tropical region, unfortunately. And I lived in Germany for 10 years, so I know this plant very well because it was like the plant that you will find on your doors, on your footstep. Like the German parking lot would look like this, like very non-urban, and you find the plants. The reason I bring the images of plants is like, whatever living in nature is actually having the natural history of a species. That's very important when it comes to crop breeding. So the model organisms, not only plants, but worms like nematodes here and flies, fruit flies, and yeast that we use for brewing beer, and Arabidopsis and mice, those model organisms in biological research, those are small, but they are mighty. Why? The answer comes from the power of genome sequencing. So you probably heard of new sequencing technology. Today I'm going to talk about a lot of DNA and a lot of sequencing technologies because I think this has revolutionized the way of making new food. That's why I'm bringing this issue very upfront. And probably I can start with human. The first human genome has been sequenced over 13 years of effort, released in 2003. However, around that time, this new sequencing technology called sequencing by synthesis, which is essentially massively parallel sequencing with a new chemistry, has revolutionized the way of getting data. So about the same time, about the 13 years after that breakthrough had happened, actually, if you look at the number of human individuals being sequenced, it's really remarkable increase from 1 individual to 18,000 individuals under this machine developed by Illumina, which is a leader in the market. So now the cost of sequencing of human dropped maybe $100 per person. And it tremendously made our understanding from genotype to phenotype. So genotype meaning it's all embedded in the DNA chemistry, to phenotype that we see myself or better version of myself or worse version of myself. So the reason why the sequencing technology has been so important is we actually sequence multiple individuals of a species so that we can have this relation very, very settled in. Here, I want to emphasize this little plant is a relative of what we eat. If you look at the list of these vegetables, leafy vegetables, you see Chinese cabbage and all casein, kailan, cauliflower, broccoli, all important leafy vegetables that we are talking about on the market. And the tree that you are seeing in biological science, we call it as a phylogeny tree, which reflects the relationship between individuals. This is a natural history of the plant. And here we see the division of left and right. Those are 2 different species. And those are different varieties that are bred from a common ancestor. What does that mean? Tracing history of breeding. So unlike natural selection that you learned from probably Darwin's finch from Galapagos Island, selecting best traits for survival, actually breeding is all about artificial selection. So this artificial selection is goal-directed selection by human, and this is the oldest practice of engineering. So here, like an Arabidopsis little model plant, this is little mustard, common ancestor. We engineer to eat the buds, floral buds, or stem, or leaf buds, or terminal leaf buds, or leaves. So these are coming from very, very same plant, maybe a few centuries ago. Actually, leafy vegetable breeding is has very short history compared to the grain breeding, like wheat, rice, or corn shown here. So you would think our ancestors would have eaten this like soft corns. However, ancient corn looked like this. So it was hard case corns. Our ancestors had to break up the shell. So conventional breeding, it happened like from this hard case corn to soft corn, it took 10,000 years. So definitely slow and laborious. What had happened through the breeding is actually we streamlined the germplasms through domestication, meaning we selected only the traits that we wanted and improve it over time. And some good traits, actually beneficial traits, might have been left behind accidentally. For example, this hard-cased corn might have a better resisting to insects or something like that. Now we live in molecular era, and DNA sequencing technologies had revolutionized the way of breeding. As Timothy emphasized, we can now have all digitalized information, and we can digitalize farming and breeding. So with this fast tool, we can actually use this DNA information to revolutionize the way of making new food by restructure the streamlined genome by genomic selection, so-called. So this is basically identify the best trait to bring back and make it happen by many different tools. However, there is still limitation. This happens only if this beneficial trait, so we call phenotype, can be selected by the information on the chemistry, in other words, DNA. So in current research, biological research, crop breeding, molecular breeding, and all like in medicine as well, actually this is a keyword, deciphering genotype to phenotype relationship. It might seem a bit like far, but it's very simple. You have tons of letters of DNA comprising of 4 letters, A, G, C, T. And imagine that the small plant that I'm working on has 125 megabytes information per individual. However, the, let's say, bell pepper that we are eating or chili pepper would have 3 gigabyte information in their genome, which is equivalent to human genome size, the billions of data. So basically what we can do is really try to search for the letter that will be associating with the phenotypic differences that we call genome-wide association studies. This is very well being carried out in medical studies to find out malaria-resistant genes and genes contributing to susceptibility to a disease and so on. So another method that we are fond of using is quantitative trait loci analysis. Basically, we have all the tools when DNA information is provided and try to link these traits to such as like a taste of rice, flavor of rice, disease resistant found in rice. This is a real research data paper published quite many years ago already by Chinese Academy of Science. They actually typed all of thousands of current varieties of Chinese varieties that's been bred thousands of years. Then they actually identify these genes or DNA markers tagging these genes as to be responsible for flavor, taste, and stickiness of rice and disease resistance, how resilient these varieties are. Those are actually the little dots that we can actually bring back from my previous slide. So I would say the technique is ripe, and probably you heard the news that this year's Nobel Prize was awarded to Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, who actually developed this CRISPR-Cas9 technology. So this bringing back process can be carried out by CRISPR or conventional breeding or genomic selection. We have many other tools. So tools are ripe, but we still have challenges. That's why we professors and researchers need to work harder to solve these type of problems. So we want to bring this back, but what if it clashes with other traits already being bred to be elite varieties? That happens a lot. For example, we call this as a combining ability. So genome and plants and physiology, they are quite complicated than we think. So sometimes many beneficial traits are really hard to combine. For example, growth, high resilience, you definitely want them. But this, you need to find optimal Pareto trade-off, because they are in trade-off. You have to have the optimal balance to strike a right striking a balance to make this happen. So another challenge that we are facing is genotype and phenotype association. We have a lot of DNA information, but what is the genetic elements determining the certain trait? And the problem here I see opportunities for you guys. So I already saw the question, as a small country, how can Singapore make it happen? You know, we are going to be the small holder, but if we identify a problem and develop a technology that can solve the problem, we are the leaders in the market. So the problem that I see is there's a lack of assessment of real phenome. We need definitely sensors, different types of sensors that can holistically measure the phenotype of plants. And also we lack prediction power. So for that, we need lots of data and machine learning to be enabled. And definitely, you guys all would be very sympathetic if you purchase seeds and you find seeds are not very good for urban farms, right? We are short of suitable germplasm bank for urban farms, definitely, because it's been never bred for urban farms yet. That's why fast forward plant breeding becomes very important in this market. So the future that I see for agri-technology and agri-tech is all combination of these three areas: plant biology, who knows the vegetables in genetics and genomics and physiology. And we need to work together with the sensor specialist so that we can produce data to be analyzed by big data analysis and computing. So we are going to be really pushing for developing phenome platform for urban farms for high yielding, high resilience vegetables. So here I show real vegetable bok choy and choy sim, kaisin, choy sam. My pronunciation might not be very good, kaisin. And these are so plump and green. However, as you see, plants can be pretty vulnerable to biotic stresses and abiotic stresses, drought, heat, as you know, and also disease. Here I show you. So here I want to introduce a bit of my research and food security and food security. Shown here is actual example of a potato field infected with devastating pathogen called Phytophthora infestans. This is the potato killer, which had caused millions of life in Ireland in the past century. So you probably heard of the Great Famine in Ireland. Actually, people who died out of hunger was actually, the number was less than the people who emigrated out of the island. You know, many people actually immigrated into the United States. So they had end up being like the population dropping 6 million. And it's actually current population, you can Google, the current population of Ireland is actually less than what we have in Singapore. But it was actually over 8 million before the famine actually hit the island. So this is how important to really understand how plants defend themselves by using plant immune system. So what I work in my lab is a plant immune system, how it's made of. And it seems like if they have a right cocktail of immune receptor repertoire in their genome, they resist and they become green. Otherwise, you succumb to the disease and you're devastated. So our goal is to use the immune information, again, genotype, DNA information, to predict the plant performance. Shown here is one of the example of my research. So by using the genome information, we can predict the plant performance. As you see, there is like dying plants versus very healthy and green plants. So we can actually predict this. And we also developed a phenotyping platform in the past institution in Germany. One of my colleagues who is very savvy, he's a biologist, trained as a biologist, but he knows how to do with the computer. So he developed the phenotyping facility. You know, phenotyping is very important. So he put the camera, cell phone camera on top of the shelf and measured the growth and so on. So here's my lab. I'm relatively new to Singapore. It's been 3 years so far, and we are rearing many great scientists in my lab, thanks to the great support from Ministry of Education in Singapore and NRF and in US. And what we want to do is really bringing rearing future agri-techno specialists. So the specialists should be the next generation breeders, should be savvy on definitely plants, plant biology, stress biology, plant immunity, but data, definitely you need to know how to deal with DNA data and also understand what to measure here, and all goes into data processing with the automated phenotyping platforms. I believe that our NUS students would greatly benefit from NUS Enterprise organization and their support to become a new leader in the next generation breeding. Okay, so probably that's all that I want to say for now, and I would be happy to take questions later. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Eunyoung. Thanks for
Thank
sharing
you.
with us your work as well as your opinions that how we can actually approach improving the agriculture via a plant physiology approach. Yeah, I believe that is actually a teamwork. Yeah, as you mentioned rightfully, beside the plant biologists, you also have to involve IoT specialists, engineering specialists, as well as the big data specialists who come into the entire ecosystem, and then collectively we improve, yeah, and then advance for the industry. All right, so thanks so much for sharing. We started to have a question coming in. I have answered some of them, and then we still have some question left behind that I will just leave it to the session after our third speaker, Andrew. Then after that, we'll probably have open up for a formal panelist Q&A session for you guys. All right. So now I would like to invite Andrew to share with us what's going on outside the market, and then what's really what they want from a market. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's your showtime.
Okay, it's showtime. Thank you. Well, thank you, David. It's nice to be here, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to NUS Enterprise to get me here today. What I'm trying to convey in this presentation is the broad scope of opportunity that there is for all kinds of technology. Now, we might call it AgTech or AgriTech, but there's a huge opportunity for technology in general to impact agriculture. And I think you'll see that there are many different things that you can do to get involved in agriculture as I go through this presentation. I want to give a quick introduction on essentially why I'm here and what Asia BioBusiness is about. Then I want to talk a bit about the context for AgTech, food security, and the drivers for AgTech interventions. Timothy's already touched on this a bit, so I'll try to move through that quite quickly. Then I'll talk a bit about the Singapore opportunities, regional opportunities, which I think we should be paying attention to, the issue of sustainability, which broadens the scope for the kind of interventions that we can make in agriculture. But then I'm going to finish off with a note of caution, asking you to be particularly mindful of a particular thing that you need to do to ensure that you can actually make the contributions that you intend. Right. Well, Asia BioBusiness, we've been around for 15 years now. It was founded in 2005 by myself and Professor Paul Teng. Now, we're based in Singapore, and Singapore's a great place to be. I've been here for 30 years, so it's pretty darn good. We're Singapore-based, but we operate globally, and you'll see later where we've been globally. It's quite broad. We work at the coal face of agriculture. We don't sit behind a desk. We get into the fields on our hands and knees and do our work there, as well as doing a lot of policy work as well. But we're intimately involved with the commercialization process. We're globally networked. Professor Teng and myself have worked in many countries around the world, know a lot of people, and can bring these people to the table. And that's what people come to us for, is our networks and our resourcefulness. We work across the whole value chain, from the production to the consumer. And we have this long-term regional presence. And we don't form our opinions about what's happening in this region from 10,000 miles away. Because we've been here for so long, and because of the work we've done training individuals with various organizations around the region, we've got great relationships and access to senior policy and decision makers and scientists around the region. There's lots of things we do there. We work on ecosystem development and optimization, commercialization, as I said, policy analysis, open innovation, and opportunity analysis. We look at food system sustainability, all the way from production to consumption and its disposal, and waste disposal. Social license to operate is something that we've gotten really involved in the last few years, and that addresses the issues working with social license. You have to ensure that innovations and technologies that you're developing are actually accepted by society, and that's not always the case. In fact, many real good innovations are actually face barriers for their contributions to society. Most recently, GM is obviously one of those. We say we work across all 4 dimensions of food security, and I'll explain that a bit in a later slide. This is where we've been working over the last 15 years, all 5 continents. Our initial, one of our large initial projects was actually in Panama, working in the life science sector, working for the Inter-American Development Bank. But we've worked with a wide variety of groups like the multinationals, Bayer, Syngenta, Monsanto, DuPont, food ingredient manufacturers, Tate & Lyle, government organizations like USDA, US State Department, industry organizations, governments, development agencies, development banks, et cetera, et cetera. So we've worked with a lot of different groups, and we have our 1 foot in the commercial world and 1 foot in the development world. And we're really trying to ensure that the advances in industry really benefit the people on the ground. We want to see agriculture develop and everybody be included. Okay, let's just get into the meat of the presentation. There are lots of opportunities to impact food security, but let's just think about what food security actually is. So the simple act of putting food in your mouth is actually is a result of quite a lot of complicated actions. And food security, it's a situation where all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. Now, we talk about food security of having 4 dimensions. The first is food availability. We need to produce food. We need to import it. We can source food from our stockpiles. We have to have food available. That food, we have to have access to that food. It's got to be physically available, so we have to access to markets. There must be logistics and infrastructure to support bringing that food to our tables. We have to have efficient trade and supply chains. And there must be also storage and processing facilities to ensure that food is accessible physically. Another access issue is economic access. And that depends on how much money we make, our GDP per capita, the price of food, and if we can't afford it, whether there are appropriate safety nets to ensure that we actually can get food to the people who can't afford it. The final dimension of food security is utilization. And that's a very interesting and very topical dimension, because it addresses nutrition and health, or nutritional security, food safety, sanitation and hygiene. It's also addresses waste and the integrity of the food we eat. Is it what it says on the label? We need to understand, we need to ensure that, you know, the food, that piece of white fish over there is actually tilapia, or it is whatever is on the label. And there's a lot of work in doing that. Now, we did an analysis for APEC a few years ago on food security policy in APEC member economies. 10 years ago, there was still a lot of focus on food availability. Production of food was, and if you could produce food effectively, you would be food secure. But over the last 10 years, we've realized that there's a lot more to it than that, and there's a lot more attention being paid on that food utilization dimension. Nutritional security is very, very important, and authenticity of food is very important. Food safety is important. So the whole balance of these dimensions has changed somewhat, but we still need to address all of those dimensions to ensure that we have a stable environment in which to live. Now, the big challenge is that all these dimensions of food security can be perturbed by many different disruptors. It can be weather, natural disasters, trade barriers, crop failures, or pandemics, as we've seen in the recent months. So there are all kinds of disruptors that can impact these dimensions of food security. Timothy's already talked a bit about the drivers for agricultural development and for AgTech interventions, and I won't go into the macro issues there because he's really addressed those, but consumers are changing considerably and have changed over the last few years. Consumers are demanding proven sustainability. They're demanding safety. They're demanding ethical sourcing and production, authenticity, as I was already talked about, transparency, how the company does what it says it does. Is it transparent in the way it does it? Is it honest? And what's become very obvious during COVID is that consumers are developing or demanding a greater connection with the production of the food that they eat. They want their food to be more local, and if it can't be local, closer to home and at least regional. There's a lot of concern about a lot of food miles being used up with moving food from all kinds of different locales around the world. People are really keen on having local food. Now, what about technology that can target the dimensions of these different food security dimensions? In general terms, we can impact production and availability with some really interesting technologies, much like Eunyoung has just talked about, doing real hard, in-deep molecular research to improve the plants that we are growing and animals that we are producing. This can apply to horticulture, it can apply to aquaculture, dairy, animal genetic work that can be done. We can improve our animal feed. We can address health issues in animal and fish. We can look at seed quality, which is my particular interest as a seed biologist. We can look at seed quality because you really have to start off with a good seed to ensure that you get a good crop. We can improve our environmental monitoring, water treatment, and we can also ensure that we have better biosecurity. We want to ensure that the crops that we grow in our region are not damaged by crops or plants or animals coming from elsewhere illegally that are not normally in that environment, who can actually end up damaging the genetic resources that we have. The physical access dimension, we can look at technology like preservation technology, cold chain and infrastructure and packaging. Fintech's an interesting one. That can help with the production and availability and access to market for the farmers. And then we've got in the utilization dimension, we've got all kinds of different technologies that can impact that dimension. The utilization dimension can also have technologies that can impact the production area or dimension, so that the food that we produce is much more effective when we actually eat it. We can make it more nutritious, for example. Golden rice will be quite a good example of that. But let's talk about AgTech in particular. Now, when I talk about AgTech, or when AgTech is talked about, it generally is used to talk about technology that impacts the situations before the farm gate, during the production. There's a lot of things that are other things that can impact the farmer themselves, which aren't really production technologies, and we can include the fintech categories in that, because they're actually helping the farmer connect with markets, and we can include fintech in the AgTech categories. But AgTech can be a lot of different things. Timothy's already mentioned some of these. We can talk about farm management software, sensing, and IoT, robotics and mechanization, which is going to become vitally important as we go further on with the reduction of people working on the land. We can look at novel farming systems that Timothy's already using to produce his strawberries, the vertical farm systems, the hydroponic systems, the production facilities on the tops of the car parks that we'll be seeing in Singapore shortly. We're looking at new bioenergy and biomaterials to impact the production side of things. We have agribusiness marketplaces, online marketplaces, and we can also develop farm-to-consumer e-groceries. These are all impacting the environment that is pre-farm gate and harvesting and the transport. I'm just going a bit beyond that farm gate as well with some of the technologies that I'm interested in. But the fintech categories are very, very important because they're offering financial services, microfinance for the farmers. The smallholder farmers are particularly needing that. Data, it's driving so much agriculture around the world. Extension services, these are really important. They can be done via various technologies and platforms, and we're really deficient in extension services around the region. If we can deliver those using various apps, then we're going to be much more successful. We can also use these fintech applications for equipment rental. Now, it doesn't have to be high-powered, really sophisticated equipment rental. It can be as simple as a particular kind of shovel that digs a particular type of hole for groups of farmers. There's all kinds of equipment rental apps available now around the region and in India. It's really quite clever. And groups of farmers rent out this equipment, use it for a day, pay the money, and then it goes back to the equipment rental company. So all kinds of different opportunities here. If we look at Singapore, and we've already talked a bit about vertical farming, and we know we're all talking about this 30 by 30 initiative. So we're going to have all our production, or a lot of our production of leafy greens in vertical farms, etc. This is really exciting, but we need technology to impact those vertical farms to ensure that they are profitable and producing efficiently. You know, in those photographs at the top there, those are not very efficient vertical farms. They're not very well designed. There's going to be a lot of manpower required in that. And you see the guy in the right-hand picture there maintaining his facility. That costs money. And so if you're seeing these multiple stacks of plants which are not robotically managed, require people to get on ladders or platforms, that's not very efficient. The one in the example I've got in the bottom there is from IGS, which is Intelligent Growth Solutions, a Scottish company that's just announced a big contract with one of the major French supermarkets. They produce farms. They don't actually grow material themselves, but they produce farms that are used by companies to produce all kinds of different vegetables. And it's all robotically managed. One person is doing it with a console, and it is really quite efficient. But we need improved technologies to impact these vertical farms so they can do what they are supposed to do for us in this 30 by 30 initiative. Lighting, energy, seeds, design of plants. There's a new company set up by Temasek and Bayer to develop plants specifically designed for these kind of systems. That's really exciting. And that leverages on the kind of research that Eunyoung does in her kind of work. It's really high-tech, really powerful, and it can really make a real difference because we'll be able to design plants that we can harvest more easily robotically. Right now, robotic in the industry is not sophisticated enough. The other thing that we talk a lot about in Singapore is plant-based meats. Now, the bowl in the middle of this photograph is where the really interesting stuff, as far as I'm concerned, goes on. That's food tech. That's not what we're talking about today. But we can impact the production of all the different protein sources that are around that bowl by new research, by improved production systems and more efficient production systems. And we can do that in a lab or in the field or whatever, but they really need to improve our production of these crops as well. Now, the big challenge for us in Singapore is that most of the crops around that bowl, except for mung bean, are actually produced in North America or Europe. That's a long way away from where we want to use them. So the microalgae, the jackfruit, and the fungi are probably the only real crops that we're producing in this part of the world that we can use for protein. So we can invest more heavily in the types of protein that we can harvest for our plant-based meats here. The microalgae production probably suffers a bit from the same issue as the vertical farms, in that it requires a lot of energy and it is quite expensive. But technology can impact that production system as well. The third pillar of our...
Perhaps we have to wrap up in about 2-3 minutes time.
Oh, yeah, okay, no worries. Well, aquaculture, I'll talk about that in a minute. The big issue for me is that while we're talking about 30% by 2030, where's the other 70% going to come from? Now, we can diversify our sources like we already do to get crops and food from all different sources, but a lot of those do come from a long way away. Singapore sits in a region which has 100 million smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers already in the world produce 70% of the food that the global population eats. This is a huge market for our AgriTech that we develop in Singapore. Now, you sometimes hear people saying, oh, there's no money in it. There's no money in smallholder farmers. All the multinationals, all the seed companies, all the large fertilizer companies are investing heavily to work with the smallholder farmers to empower them. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is developing a center of excellence with Bayer, with various government entities here, with various overseas groups to develop a center of excellence for smallholder farmers that will help smallholder farmers get the knowledge, get the technology, get the finance, and will also create an environment that will allow those technologies to go to work. These are the smallholder farmers of the region. Many of them are women. The majority in some countries are women. And we need to develop scale appropriate and gender appropriate technologies for these people. But they're already using some high tech approaches in their farming. 3 or 4 years ago, you would never have seen drones being used, handheld devices, various kinds of IoT sensors, satellite technology. All of this is being used now, but the scope and potential is huge. We need to be sustainable, and because we need to be sustainable, we need to think about other technologies like waste technology, water management, and energy. Many of these farmers that I'm talking about here are off the grid. We need alternative energy solutions. We don't want to create a carbon-based economy in this large smallholder farmer population. We have to think about methanol production, water power, wave power, tidal power, these kind of things so that they can get access to energy. My last 2 slides here, Dave. Opportunities abound in Singapore and beyond for people who are getting involved in agriculture. And I've been involved in academia myself and know there's a lot of money around, not just in Singapore, but around the world, for academics to develop technologies and ideas for solving the problems of the farming community. But the problems they're addressing must be real. And what must be done by the researchers must be relevant and commercially feasible. And you must ask yourself, will anybody pay for your solution? We're seeing too much money being spent on solutions which will not be able to find a home. They're not relevant for the smallholder farmers or even the vertical farmers. Pressure test your ideas with industrial players, because they will give you the reality. They will tell you, I would never buy that because I don't have, that might be a problem in your mind, but it's not a problem in my farm. We don't need to worry about that disease because we're only growing over six weeks in a vertical farm. We don't need to worry about this sort of thing. So, bear in mind that your thinking and your technologies have to be relevant. Let me just show you this one slide of this lady, Dr. Moira Smith. She works with DCAT, which is a company Asia BioBusiness represents in the region. She's an amazing lady. She is a chief technological officer for DCAT. She designed the sensing systems in the European jet fighter. She now works with DCAT using her sensing expertise in agriculture. She's based in Adelaide, and their biggest client is Elders, one of the biggest agricultural companies in Australia. She's taking her ideas and knowledge into agriculture. They're applying it to all kinds of different things, but most importantly, the data they have the APIs, and they have the analytics to use readily available data to take to the next level. And that's incredibly powerful. But there's all kinds of different technologies that can be applied to agriculture. One of the ones that they're developing is the ability to detect the causative organism in algal blooms around aquaculture facilities from satellites. So that's a very, very powerful tool for the aquaculture industry, because aquaculture industry wants to know if there's algal blooms, and they also want to know if there's no algal blooms, because then they can use that as a marketing ploy for their product. That's all I've got to say, folks. Sorry if I went on a bit too long there, David. And
It's okay. Yeah.
There's a seminar on tomorrow if you're interested, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's on my website if you want to, on the Age of BioBusiness website at opinion page, if you want to come along and hear about some Canadian agricultural technology.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Okay. With that, the completion of the three speakers for sharing with us their opinions and their view towards the future of AgriTech. And then now we actually open up the session for Q&A. I actually have seen we received currently 13 questions, probably altogether 18 questions. 5 has been answered via typing. I have actually answered 5 of them. And then I realized that there are quite a few questions regarding GMO. Yeah, GMO. So there are questions from, let me see, from Kuma, APP. And then I have question from Xiangjing Cheng. Okay, they are actually concerned over the utilization, the GMO, as also is utilization of use of the CRISPR-Cas9 is considered a kind of a GMO techniques. Probably I'll address. Probably Eunyoung can address on this question.
Yeah, I can start, and I think Andrew is very experienced with this topic, and he will help me.
Yeah, probably both of y'all can actually address this question.
So when it comes to GMO debate, well, when I was living in Germany, all the plant biologists in European countries were really trying to persuade the public because they were having really misled ideas. You know, as I actually showed from hard case corn to current corn, do you think it's genetically non-modified? Everything that we eat is indeed genetically modified to some extent. Actually, traditional breeding is more brutal genetically modifying, but CRISPR is very minor modification with guided information. So we are very much hopeful, and with the DNA sequencing technology, we can identify from before and after, you know, what had been modified, and we can actually provide all the data. So more complicated genetics and gene-gene interaction would be another issue over the layer. But I can also introduce one research which was published several years back. You know, genetically modified organisms were criticized by transferring DNAs from, let's say, a pathogen to plant, or a pathogen, you know, from bacteria to animal, right? Let's say. But people find this example in nature as well, you know? So nature does it. We call it horizontal transfer. Sometimes there was it was actually published research. People sequenced the genome of sweet potato, and they found piece of DNA coming from soil bacteria. So it's integrated into plant genome. So this genetic modification is whatever happening in nature. And I think still our public in Asian countries and ASEAN, we are pretty open-minded. I hope we don't have really blinded no, you know. So when it's done well, it can really solve many, many problems. We are very hopeful. But still, we can actually if public is still not very ready, we can also combine classical plus genomics. We are pretty versatile. We learned from decades of public opinions that we can be versatilely improve crops and traits.
Okay, thank you, Eunyoung. How about Andrew? What's your opinion on this?
Well, the position around the regulatory environment for CRISPR is quite variable, because a number of countries have said, go right ahead, we don't consider this to be genetically modified. Because really you're only doing what I think would be described as a point mutation in your DNA, which happens all the time. So, you know, it's many countries in Japan, I believe the US, I think Australia, New Zealand, all have said, go right ahead. We're not going to regulate that because that is like normal genetics. With respect to the GMO, that is an interesting one. It's died down a lot in most of the Western countries. People, there are always some hardcore activists, but you know, compared with 10 years ago, it's very, very minor. And you know, the Impossible Burger uses a genetically modified technique to produce their yeast. Now, it's not a genetically modified ingredient, but they use a genetically modified yeast to, you know, produce their leg hemoglobin. You know, that's been accepted pretty well. So it's an interesting dichotomy whereby, oh, we don't want unnatural GMOs, but oh, I'll have my plant-based burger. So it's quite an interesting one. But it does come up a fair bit of time, but there's a lot of myths and fallacies around genetically modified crops that, you know, the activists resurrect every 2 or 3 years or so. And the regulatory authorities have put in place very stringent regulatory requirements for GM crops. And the producers satisfy those, and the safety of these GM crops is assured far better than some of the plants that are normal, non-GMO. Some of the plants, if they were like peanuts or kiwi fruit, if they were GM or subject to GM regulation criteria, they probably wouldn't be approved. Yeah, because of the allergenic potential.
Yeah, so echoing your opinions, right? I also have known that they are actually approved commercial salmon. They actually has used CRISPR-Cas9, actually has been approved by the regulator. So therefore, I think it's really subject to the opinions of the regulatory within that countries on whether that is considered GMO or non-GMO. All right, great. Okay, we actually have received two questions, right? One is actually from Joel. The other one is actually a couple of people actually asked this question. One is from Joel. The other one is actually from let me see. Joel, I think basically, okay. Joel is actually asking, how does indoor urban farmers combat the high cost of crop growing in Singapore due to the high energy and manpower costs as compared to open land such as in Indonesia? Okay, so Tim, you want to address on this question?
Yeah, so thanks for that, David. I'm certainly happy to jump in. So I think going back to my earlier presentation, at least for Singapore, we do acknowledge that the cost of operating an indoor farm, especially from the energy and water standpoint, can be quite high compared to our neighboring markets. So how Singrow approaches this is to focus mainly on the development of the technology, and with the maturation of the technology to then collaborate with partners in overseas markets, insofar as to basically enable the production to be carried out overseas. Yeah. Just a pitch from my ex-government colleagues. It's really about Singapore's prominence from an IP protection standpoint, that we are allowed the freedom to develop cutting-edge technology, which you can then, you know, proliferate more economically in overseas markets. But you know, that's not to say that Singrow doesn't try to look at the ways and means to reduce its carbon footprint, energy use, and even to develop new automation and mechanization techniques to offset the higher labor cost. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Tim, for helping to address on these questions. Okay, we have questions that specifically addressed to Prof. Chae, Eunyoung. Okay, they said that I would like to know more about what is entailed to increase the germ plus diversity for urban farming, and how can Singapore Research Institute contribute to this?
Yeah, I saw the question. Thank you
Yeah.
for asking. So I think for diversification, one thing is if we understand genotype-phenotype association, we can actually engineer particular thing. But what we can also pursue is hybridization. Actually, this is a domain of my research. Actually, hybridization is very classical tool to diversify and all mix up and try to innovate the quality. So this is quite a classical breeding, but we can do it. We can hybridize Kailan 1, Kailan 2, and make Kailan 1 plus 2. But many times it can be exceeding this, it could be showing superior quality. So hybridization, understanding the hybridization and what happens in the hybridization is actually one of the research area that I think Singapore can contribute to. Because it's like making an innovation. 1 plus 1 is not 2. It's 1 plus 1 can be 100 or over.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eunyoung. There is one question that actually addressed to Andrew. Which kind of agri-tech would have the highest priority for Singapore now? Your opinion. You have leafy vegetable, fruits, things like that. Yeah, high value crops or plants, like herbs, things like that.
Well, it all depends on your perspective, really. I mean, if you're a company, you want to make as much profit as you possibly can, but at the same time, we also want to have affordable food for everybody. So, the leafy greens are a challenge, I think, because they are so ubiquitous, and producing them in vertical farms is going to be competitive. Or very, very difficult to be competitive with some of the other production systems, particularly across the causeway. So I think the vertical farms is certainly something that we really need to invest in technology, source technology to ensure that we can, bring these costs down and let produce affordable production from those farms. I think that's where they probably should concentrate on. But aquaculture, all three, the government's made the right decisions to target those three areas, and picking out one rather than the other, it's pretty tough. But I like the vertical farm environment really.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Okay, there are quite a number of questions being addressed to us. But I think we are going to take on the last one or two questions. Okay, we apologize that if you have sent us the question, we are unable to answer now. Okay, but we'll definitely get back to you all those questions. All right. So probably why not Okay, let me see. Okay, we actually have a question. I think there's a lot of question actually addressed. Okay, on the profitability of running an indoor farming. All right. So, for example, Niha actually expressed what are the biggest hurdle in achieving profitability of for outdoor vertical farming and indoor farming farm. So Tim, you want to take on this because you are doing a
Yeah.
lot of commercialization?
Yeah, I guess that's a question for us. To be honest, to run and operate an indoor farm or even a greenhouse is quite challenging because there's always a myriad of variables to consider. You know, the slightest thing could be the needle. I mean, could be the thing that breaks the camel's back. But I think from the outset, at least for Singrow, we focus on the research and the development of technology, and less so in the activity of setting up an indoor farm, right? So this allows us to be a lot more asset-light, right? Less intensive on the capex spending. So this allows us to be a lot more agile, a lot more nimble in developing the solutions that we can ultimately proliferate to partners, and basically, you know, minimize our burn rate and hopefully get a shorter ROI. I'm personally challenged, if I were to be honest, to even explore the prospect of developing an indoor farm here in Singapore because of the costs mentioned earlier. Not to say that it's not possible, but I think it requires a very strong grasp of the different fundamentals to run an indoor farm, whether it's manpower, energy use, technology adoption, so on and so forth. So simply put, I think the focus on technological development and innovation versus setting up an indoor farm might be the way to go, at least for a market like Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think we are officially close our Q&A. So for those attendees who actually have sent us a question, we already acknowledge your question, and then we'll get back to you very soon. All right. So thank you very much for Andrew, Eunyoung, and Tim for attending this roundtable together with us, and I will hand over to Chae for the closing.
Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, David.
And a warm welcome and thank you to our amazing speakers, Tim, Eunyoung, Andrew, and everyone for tuning in to our Industry Roundtable series today.
Yeah.
That was a very exciting session where we dive deep into the AgriTech ecosystem and explored frontier technologies and possibilities in envisioning a better future.
Thanks again for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So we have come now to the end of the session. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Nice meeting you all.